Hello again, everyone. Tom Nagorski with the Cipher Brief, here for a conversation today about Ukraine's drone weapons arsenal and its innovation in the drone weapons field, the impact that has had in its resistance against the Russians in this now almost 3-year-long war, and also perhaps the impact and lessons of the drone warfare in Ukraine for future warfare. And we have a guest eminently qualified to talk about all these things today. Stacey Pettijohn joins us from the Center for New American Security, where she is director of the Defense Program. We have spoken before, Stacey, and so I know that you are a longtime student and scholar of many things, but of drone warfare in particular. And I thought it might be useful for our audience if you could just start by, and I assume you were a student and a scholar of all this before this war began. To what extent, though, has Ukraine's ability in this field, its innovation, its new industry in terms of drone manufacturing, to what extent has any or all of that surprised you?
I mean, I think it has surprised everyone the scale of what we've seen and the fact that the Ukrainians have not only taken modified commercial drones and used them in the close fight, in close ground combat, but also, experimented with new uses for drones, finding new ways to weaponize them, and also building an entire arsenal of strategic strike weapons. A
Mhm.
lot of these are long range kamikaze drones that they've been shooting into Russia that have sometimes targeted oil refineries, even Moscow, air bases. And then there are the drone boats that have really been able to allow the Ukrainians to deny the Russians' use of the Black Sea, which has probably been one of the biggest successes for drones. Alone or primarily drones, because they also have anti-ship cruise missiles that have been important,
Mhm.
but they've played a critical role there. And so I think it's just the scale of it, that they're used in so many different missions and close fight and strategic strikes. And then also that every single ground formation has a drone. No one's
Mhm.
going out without them now. They're going to have strike drone companies or formations alongside infantry units. They have ISR drones so that they've really permeated at every echelon of the ground forces.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsekedge.com.
Just to come back, you said drone boats, maritime drones, sea drones. Speaking to the layperson here, that's me. To what extent did those exist before this war? I assume they didn't, invent them out of whole cloth.
They sort of did. I mean, the US has been working on uncrewed surface vehicles, and other countries have. I think there's been some experimentation by Iranian proxies in the Middle East previously.
Mhm.
But the Ukrainians, again, here took this to a whole new level and really it's developed in ways that were very unexpected. It started out as Sea-Doos, the jet skis that people use for recreation, and they modified those platforms, putting on them remote controls and explosives and a sensor, a camera, so that they could sail them out and threaten or attack the Russian Navy. But it's evolved rapidly. They've become much more sophisticated, though they're still simple, small boats. And the Ukrainians are building diverse groups of them now that are operating together. So the Russians have adapted to the kamikaze bone strikes and have really fairly effectively employed their tactical aircraft and their helicopters to counter them. So they've been keeping a watch. And this is one area where Russia retains an advantage just in terms of having some degree of, I don't know if it's air superiority, but control of the air in a way that the Ukrainians don't. and they've been able to come out and find the drone boats and intercept them. So what the Ukrainians did was they put some air-to-air missiles, two of them, on a new version of the drone boat,
Right.
and they send out the kamikaze and then have a little sand bush where they will put out the surface-to-air missile drone boat and shoot down. They've shot down at least one, but probably more Russian helicopters um, using that tactic. And they're creating other ones where some of the drone boats are going to carry small FPV, the small racing kamikaze drones, or quadcopters and other things. So it's really, there are new tactics and they're employing new technologies together in combinations all of the time.
Well, and this makes me want to ask you a question, which might have to wait till the histories of the war are written. But is all this, do you think, a function of just need and necessity? I mean, or is it you typical, Ukrainian ingenuity in terms of? I know they had a pretty strong IT sector before the war. Where do you give the credit and the explanation for all the things you've just run through?
I think it's both. I think there's definitely a lot of innovation and ingenuity on the part of the Ukrainians, and they do have a strong IT sector that they've been able to draw on and pull on parts of their civil society in a way to support the war effort that, frankly, it's been harder for a country like Russia to do. It's really disaggregated, though. So you find that a lot of the Ukrainian drone units, the most expert ones, have their own shop that produces those drones for them, like the small FPV racing
Mhm.
kamikaze drones. And there is a centralized system in delivery, but they tend to rely on this much more disaggregated network and different contexts that people have in the commercial and then in the private sector to actually fulfill their requirements and to generate these new needs. You have seen a lot of actors realize the utility of small commercial drones. I mean, this goes back to ISIS in Iraq, in Mosul in like 2016, I think was the first. And in Libya, it didn't get a lot of play in the press, but the GNA and LNA were both using a lot of the DJI Phantom quadcopters for ISR. They had fewer of them that I think were modified and actually armed, and probably didn't employ them in as sophisticated of a way and integrate them with their other systems. But they were still there, and because they're readily available and fairly affordable, um, people have found ways to use them.
Yeah. I saw you wrote about the Libyan example, and you're right, that has not gotten a lot of attention. You also wrote recently that I think, you tell me, I'm paraphrasing here, but that, there's a limit to what the Ukrainians can do for all these successes. You can't do everything with drones. What are the limitations, would you say, despite all the successful innovation and impact that they've had?
I mean, they've provided a tremendous new tactical strike weapon like the FPV, but they haven't fully substituted for other systems. They're more of a complement than a replacement. So you can't generate sort of the volume of fire
Hmm.
with or as large of fires, right? The FPVs are very small, so they have a limited payload. The bombs that they carry tend to be fairly under 5 kilograms, I think. So pretty small. There's a limited amount of damage that you can have. And right now, a lot of them, because they're using fairly cheap commercial subcomponents, they can only have so many flying within the same area. So you can't actually have a huge swarm, not autonomous swarm, but even remotely controlled swarm, because their radio signals interfere with each other. And that could be changed. They could buy better radios that don't interfere, like our cell phones don't, but that costs more money. So you're not able to generate sort of the volume of fire or as big of fires as you can with other weapons. They all also require a significant amount of training to
Hmm.
operate effectively, and that's another factor that limits how much they can be scaled.
Hmm. I want to turn, in the time we have left, Stacy, to the impact of this beyond Ukraine. We've had a lot of pretty high-ranking ex-military folks tell us that this kind of revolution in drone warfare in Ukraine carries very necessary lessons for the United States. What are some of those, lessons that the United States is drawing from, or you think should draw from what's been happening there?
Absolutely agree that there are important lessons. It's also important not to draw the wrong lessons, I think. What I see is that I would argue that small commercial drones or commercially derived drones have profoundly transformed close combat, but they're limited to fairly tactical ranges. So we're talking 10, maybe 15, 20 kilometers at most. And you haven't seen the effects extend as far. So they've really made that close fight a lot more lethal, a lot more dangerous because you can be seen and reached out and hit by any number of different systems. The other factor is that right now this is largely a cost competition. You're
Mm.
looking for the cheapest type of system that you can create and use effectively. And if you can impose cost on your adversary by forcing them to fire much more expensive defensive
Mm.
weapons, that in some ways is a victory. We've seen the Ukrainians have stopped shooting down some of just the ISR drones that the Russians have, the Orlans, because the Russians have produced so many of them that they can easily replace them, and they're not worth expending even a Stinger missile or another man-portable air defense weapon, which is what would be needed to take them down. So
Mm.
you need to find effective countermeasures. Electronic warfare is another one. We've seen how commercial technologies and the availability of commercial jammers and antennas has really polluted the electromagnetic spectrum and created a lot of challenges, and leading sometimes to simple things like using optical fiber to fly some of the drones.
Oh,
But
wow.
again, tactical ranges. And the final thing is just the speed of adaptation. You have to be able to change quickly. Um, when I was talking to one unit in Ukraine, they said that they would order drones for a particular mission no more than 1 week in advance so that they could be configured for the threat at that moment in time. And that if they were beyond that, they would likely need to be modified again or not be that effective. So we have to figure out how to adapt both the hardware and the software of our systems faster going forward.
Wow, 1 week. That's mind-boggling. So, last question then, and it's probably the answer would be a term paper probably, but uh, where do you grade the United States right now in terms of its ability in this space, its capacity? Is it ready? You've written about what may loom in Taiwan. Where do you see the points in which the United States has to maybe up its game a little bit?
There are a lot of them. They need to figure out how to more effectively employ drones at all echelons, especially in the ground forces, the Army and the Marines. But we also need to figure out how to defend against them, and to have enough defenses on every system is going to need some sort of self-protection in addition to some of the air defenses that are more expensive and will guard larger areas. So the Army is working on this. You've seen General George, the Chief of Staff, has the transforming in contact, I think is what it is, and looking at how they experiment and adapt with commercial technologies now and begin to use them, and just like buy some quadcopters, give them to soldiers. You also have actual requirements that have been issued for a range of different small drones. They have the short range reconnaissance, the SRR drone,
Mhm.
which I think has been awarded to Skydio, which is just a quadcopter, and that's for platoon level. You have a medium range one, which I think has Anduril's Ghost helicopter drone has been in the mix. And then there's a long range vertical takeoff and landing that they're looking for battalions. So they're trying to make sure those lower echelons all have that type of ISR and strike capability, but they're a long way from being there yet. And they're going to have to figure out how they buy a drone that might not be effective in, months or weeks or years, right? And start replacing it. And I think this is what the department was trying to do with DIU and the replicator program, but
Right.
it's not clear if they've actually worked out and made that process stick yet.
Well, As I said, could be a term paper, but you put it very succinctly and really appreciate it. We're going to have to stop there. But Stacey Pettyjohn, thanks so much for being with us at the Cipher Brief.
Thanks for having me.